The courtroom was silent. Yellow lights hanging from the ceiling echoed the whispers echoing off the high walls, remnants of the Soviet era. Below the high platform where the judges sat, a man in handcuffs waited silently. This man was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Across the table sat Vladimir Putin. This time he was not a leader but a witness. At the International Criminal Court's special session, the responsibility for the Russia-Ukraine war was being tried. But what was intriguing was that the one on trial was not Putin, but Zelensky. The charges, escalating the war unnecessarily, failing to ensure the safety of civilians, and sabotaging diplomatic channels. Before the trial began, everyone was waiting for something. The silence was the most powerful expression of tension. Then the judge banged his gavel. Defendant Volodymyr Zelensky, do you wish to defend yourself? Zelensky raised his head. There was no fear or anger in his eyes, only exhaustion. The deep exhaustion brought on by war, loss, and betrayed agreements. Your Honor, he began, I am not the architect of this war. I am someone who has listened to the cries of children born in the midst of cities bombed by missiles. We defended our land, but at every step we faced not an army, but a shadow, and diplomacy cannot be conducted with shadows. Putin rose slightly from his seat. He looked at Zelensky for a long time. Unexpectedly, he took the floor. Your Honors, the process that brought this man here shows how ironic history can be. I sat down with him many times. We tried many times to reach an agreement, but he, in my opinion, was a bit too bold. One of the judges turned to Putin. So you wanted to reach an agreement with him, but he refused? Putin smiled. The peace we offered him was, in his view, surrender. A murmur rose in the hall. The trial had begun, but the real courtroom was just getting started. Zelensky stood silently at the podium listening to Putin's words. There was no defiance in his expression. On the contrary, he looked like a teacher preparing for a long speech. When he was given the floor again, he cleared his throat slightly. Putin called me too brave. Maybe he's right. But I couldn't remain calm enough to watch tank tracks leave their mark on the streets of the country where I was born. That day, when the planes flew low over Mariupol, I felt more like a father than a president. A deep silence fell over the hall. The press stopped writing. Even Putin looked away for a moment. Zelensky continued, I have no objection to you judging me here, but the question that needs to be asked is this. Who threw the first stone? Who was sitting at the negotiating table with a map and marked cities in their other hand? The judge warned Zelensky, Mr. Defendant, you must present a concrete defense, not personal feelings. Zelensky bowed his head. The concrete fact is this, Your Honor. The wreckage of the first missile that fell on Kiev on the first day of the war is still there. Those who touched it found Russian writing on it, and we read that writing. Operational necessity. We called that an invasion. Putin shifted in his seat. He smiled slightly. Zelensky speaks well. He has always been a good speaker. In fact, he used to be a comedian, as you know. But there is no humor here, only facts. The fact is that Ukraine has become a pawn of the West. NATO has come to our border. We could not remain silent. Zelensky immediately responded, Is that why you sent weapons that hit children's hospitals because NATO came to your border? Is that your geopolitical reflex? These words echoed in the courtroom. Putin did not respond at first. He just stared at Zelensky. There was no anger in that gaze. It was more like a desire to understand. It was as if he was seeing the man in front of him for the first time. The court adjourned briefly, but outside, the world was already beginning to reshape itself in response to the words of these two men. When the break ended, the courtroom filled up again. The crowd outside echoed with protests and cheers of support, in stark contrast to the silence inside. The world was watching this trial. Former enemies now sat on opposite sides of the same table in the same courtroom. The judge once again turned to Putin. The man rose slowly to his feet. Every movement carried the weight of years of political power, the gaze of an emperor, but this time there was a different tone in his voice, less of the usual harshness. Your Honors, he said, today we stand here as two sides of a war, but sometimes wars begin not with weapons, but with silence. We watched that silence for years. We saw the division within Ukraine. We saw Donbass, Crimea, the people left to their own fate. These were not just territories. They were people, and Russia could not abandon them. Zelensky nodded silently. What about our children? The freedom you speak of has become our graveyards. If this was such a humanitarian intervention, why did you come with missiles instead of diplomacy? Putin sighed softly. Because you had already declared us enemies. You spoke with the voice of the West, not your own people. Zelensky interrupted. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps we acted too hastily. But my people trusted me, and I had to protect them. Being tried here today does not change that, because I still stand stand with them." These words echoed through the hall. The judge paused briefly before speaking again. "Mr. Putin, do you have any questions for the defendant?" Putin shook his head. Then he looked at Zelensky with a deep, complicated look. "When the war started, we didn't have a chance to talk directly. I want to ask, if I could have reached you directly that first night, what would you have said?" Zelensky answered without hesitation, "Stop. Just stop." A chill filled the room. The response was unexpectedly simple, yet deeply impactful. The judge banged the gavel once more. "The hearing is adjourned until tomorrow." But that day, it wasn't just a court hearing that was postponed. Perhaps the first crack in years of enmity had begun to show a glimmer of light. The next day, the courtroom was more crowded than ever. International observers, media outlets, diplomats, they were all there. Zelensky entered the room wearing a black suit, clutching his files tightly. He had a different air about him today. He didn't look tired or angry, just determined. Putin arrived with his usual composure. However, his eyes were constantly searching for Zelensky. A kind of awareness had developed between the two leaders. For years, they had spoken through the media, targeting each other with tanks, sanctions, and harsh statements. Now they were sitting in the same room, a few meters apart. The judge gave Zelensky the floor. Zelensky stood up and buttoned his jacket. "Today, I want to talk not only about the past, but also about the future. Yes, I am being tried for war crimes, but am I the only one? Or is it only him?" he said, turning to Putin. "All of us, the actors in this conflict, have played with the fate of our peoples. I saw children's bodies in the streets of Kyiv. You saw young soldiers buried in mud in Donetsk. It is always the people who lose." Putin listened without looking away. Zelensky continued. "In my opinion, leadership is not just about making decisions. Sometimes knowing when to retreat is also leadership. It is easy to fan the flames. All it takes is a match. But to extinguish that fire, that is where true courage lies." One journalist swallowed hard. Another stopped taking notes. The courtroom was enveloped in a respectful silence. Zelensky turned back to the judge. "Today, if you are going to sentence me, go ahead. But if I am being tried for defending my people, for wanting peace instead of war, then history will not judge this court. It will judge all of us." Putin sat up slightly. For a moment, he did not speak, but his demeanor made it clear he wanted to say something. The judge turned to him. "Is there anything you wish to say, Mr. Putin?" Putin bowed his head, then fixed his gaze back on Zelensky. "You speak well, even better than I expected. Until now, I have seen you only as an enemy, but perhaps I have never truly listened to you." By the third day of the trial, the atmosphere had grown even heavier. Outside, demonstrations had grown larger, with crowds calling for peace facing off against nationalists from both sides. The world's media was broadcasting live from outside the courtroom, while inside, every word spoken by the two men was reaching millions of people. Putin had arrived early that morning. He had neither his advisor nor his interpreter with him. This was unusual. He was silent. But a careful observer could sense a kind of internal struggle beneath the surface. When Zelensky entered the courtroom, he took a small notebook out of his jacket pocket. It had an old, faded Ukrainian flag symbol on it. He sat down, turning the notebook over in his hands. At that moment, the judge gave the floor back to Putin. The Russian leader stood up. This time there was no written speech. There were no files in front of him. He began to speak directly. "I am Vladimir Putin. For over 20 years, I have shaped the destiny of a country with power, with determination, and often with harshness. I have had many enemies, those who were loyal, those who were afraid, those who resisted. But the person standing before me now is the one who has resisted me the most in this war." His eyes turned to Zelensky. "Volodymyr, I have always spoken to you with arrogance. I saw you as an actor, not a leader. But now, your words, they have made me think." There was a stir in the room. Some people raised their heads. Others put down their pens. "You speak from the heart of your people. I speak from their fears. Perhaps that is the real difference between us." Zelensky did not look away. Putin took a deep breath and continued. "Today I am not speaking to you, to this court, or to the world. I am speaking to my past self, because perhaps the greatest battle is within oneself." At that moment, the silence grew. The judge had bowed his head and stopped taking notes. The entire hall felt as though it were walking across an invisible bridge between the two men. Putin took a step forward. "Volodymyr, you didn't show me any documents. No secret agreements, no maps, no diplomatic offers. But what you said reminded me of something I couldn't find in my own archives: humanity." After a moment's hesitation, Zelensky stood up. He took the small notebook out of his jacket pocket. He opened it. The pages were old. The writing was handwritten. This notebook is the diary of a Ukrainian soldier who died when the war began. He was 19 years old. His name was Petro. On the last page, he wrote, "I didn't want to fight, but they said we had no other choice. Maybe one day those who sent us to war will try to talk." Putin's eyes misted over slightly. He didn't know what to say. For the first time in a courtroom, he had felt like a judge, but now he felt like a convicted man. He picked up the gavel but stopped before striking it. Today may not be the day of judgment in this court. Perhaps this is just the beginning. Putin approached Zelensky. The distance between them had narrowed to a few steps. He extended his hand. "I was the one who started the war, but perhaps you are the one who should end it." Zelensky shook his hand. In that moment, the silence in the hall became one of the loudest moments in history. The silence in the courtroom remained unbroken for a long time. After Putin and Zelensky shook hands, everyone looked at each other, but no one dared to speak. A historic first was taking place. Two war leaders bearing the responsibility for thousands of lives on their shoulders had managed to remain human in a courtroom. However, the world was not ready for such rapid change. Outside, cameras, microphones, and live social media broadcasts were capturing every moment and transmitting it to the world. Some interpreted these images as a sign of victory. Others saw it as a betrayal. Some Russian officials viewed Putin's handshake as a sign of weakness, while some Ukrainians interpreted Zelensky's message of peace as a sign of surrender. But inside the courtroom, a different reality was unfolding. The judge slowly tapped his gavel on the table. The official decision on this case will be announced within a few weeks, in accordance with international law. But what we have seen here today points to something much stronger than the law: human conscience. The court adjourned temporarily. Those in the courtroom began to slowly make their way out. Putin chose to remain. Zelensky stayed with him. When the crowd dispersed, the two men were left alone. There were no bodyguards. There were no cameras. Only wooden walls, a hint of dust, and years of accumulated fatigue. Putin took a small pen out of his inner pocket. He turned the cap and opened the tip. Then he wrote something on the edge of the court table. When Zelensky approached, he noticed what he had written. "Power is measured not by destruction, but by change." Putin looked up. "Perhaps I should have learned this years ago." Zelensky stared at the sentence for a moment. Then he looked up. "It's not too late for you. It's not too late for anyone." At that moment, the door knocked. A young official entered. He held an envelope in his hand. "Mr. Leaders, this letter arrived a few minutes ago. The sender is unknown, but it is addressed to both of you." Putin took the letter. There was no seal or address on the envelope. Only two words were written: "Understanding is permanent." He opened the envelope. It was a short message. "We saw the step you took today for peace. Now it is not your turn, but your people's. Show as much patience as you have shown courage, because true victory lies not in revenge, but in understanding." Putin and Zelensky looked at each other. They did not know who had sent the message. Perhaps a diplomat, perhaps a child, perhaps a mother, perhaps no one at all. But its meaning was profound. Zelensky slowly stood up. "There will be no victory in this war, only an end, and I hope that this end will be like a new beginning." Putin stood up. He was now older, more tired, but also quieter. "Hostility is easy," he said, "but peace, that takes a lifetime." They walked out the door together. The crowd waiting outside fell silent for a moment. Camera flashes went off, but this time the images were not of tanks under fire, but of two leaders walking side by side. That night, only one photo circulated on screens around the world: Putin and Zelensky shaking hands in a courtroom. Only one sentence was written underneath: "Sometimes the hardest peace is the most necessary."